As children, we are told stories. Stories and legends that couldn't possibly be true. These legends exist to test our imagination, to explain the world's mysteries to us at an early age. But every story has at least a little grain of truth. In the vast amounts of made-up exaggerations and embellishments that mixed in with all those falsehoods, there is a truth. A truth about a group of Scotsmen that came to America nearly 100 years before Christopher Columbus.
The Zeno narrative is an account that was found in, I believe, the early 16th century, the late 1500s, early 1500s, by some boys who were playing in an attic in Venice, Italy. And they found the logs of their, I think, great uncle and grandfather, who had been admirals in the Venetian maritime. The family name was Zeno, and apparently these logs documented an excursion that was led by their Venetian ancestors, in which they went up to Scotland and were befriended by and eventually became in the employ of a Scottish prince by the name of Zichmey. And they led Zichmey and his group, his fleet, across the North Atlantic. It describes the whole journey, but many people believe they ended up in North America, in New England. And so that's sort of the documentary evidence that many people believe is the source of this Westford Night legend. And so the theory is that Prince Henry St. Clair, he had either maps or journals or oral history coming down from his mother's side of the family that basically described how to get across the North Atlantic and go to this land called Vinland. And for whatever reason, in the late 1300s, he took a fleet of boats and again island hopped his way across the North Atlantic, leaving Orkney and going to the Shetland Islands and then to the Faroe Islands and to Iceland and to Greenland and then to Labrador and Newfoundland and eventually down the coast, we think, as far as Nova Scotia, where they spent the winter, and then continued the next year on to New England. We got to the mouth of the Merrimack River. A number of his men, by the way, had gone back at this point, but he had two boats continuing down. They came up the Merrimack River, they portaged over the waterfalls in Lawrence, Haverhill, Lowell, and eventually got off the Merrimack River onto the Stony Brook, which led him into what we now know as Westford, Massachusetts.
We don't know too much about the Westford Knight as a person, but we know a great deal about the leader of the expedition which brought him here, and that was Jarl Henry Sinclair. Jarl is Norse for Earl, and he was the Jarl of the Orkney Islands. He was also a baron of Roslin in Scotland, so presumably they were getting the lay of the land.
And one of his men, James Gunn, died. We're not sure how, whether he died of natural causes, or perhaps there was a skirmish. And to commemorate Gunn's death, as was the custom of the time, they carved an effigy into the rock ledge. And in medieval times, the most important thing to a fallen knight, of course, was his sword. And so they carved the sword first, and then perhaps, we're not quite certain, carved his shield and his outline of his face and his body. Unfortunately, really all that's visible still today is the sword. The rest of it, there's some old photographs that indicate there was something there. It's sort of hard to make out, but through the designs on the shield, some experts in Great Britain have ascertained that it is the Gunn clan that has the heraldry on the sword, on the shield, and that's how we identify James Gunn.
The effigy is punched, it's not chiseled, and that proves that it was done by armorers who would come on an expedition, presumably to repair armor just by putting in, rivets. I think it's rivets. So they would have a punch, and years and years ago, before it eroded so badly, I've lain down alongside it, and you can see how the punches start going up the left-hand side. Actually, the knight's right-hand side, because he's lying flat on his back, and they get duller as you come down the right-hand side.
And so what we still see today is clearly packed into the rock ledge is a medieval battle sword. And it's not a dagger or a fencing sword. It's definitely a two-handed, Mel Gibson in Braveheart, 14th century Scottish, hit you over the head battle sword. So even if that's all it is, even if there's no shield and no helmet and no body there, just the medieval battle sword being carved on the rock ledge is still indicative of some kind of potential 14th century medieval journey to North America. By trade, so I'm trained to look at things like evidence and to weigh and evaluate evidence. And I like to say that if I were going to go to the jury with the story of Prince Henry Sinclair, and the only piece of evidence I had was the Westford knight carving, I don't think I'd win the case. I mean, there has to be corroborating evidence. If these guys were here, it means probably other people were here, and there should be other evidence, not just one artifact. And it turns out there is another really important artifact. It's called the boat stone. It's a boulder that was found not far from where we think Prince Henry Sinclair and his group climbed Prospect Hill. It was found in the 1920s during a construction project in Westford.
The big thing in connection to the knight is that it too is punched. So we presume that it was done at the same time, by the same. They must have stayed quite a while for the whole effigy to have been done, so they must have camped out here.
Packed with a metal tool, almost like an armorist would use, as opposed to chiseled with a knife or something, but packed into the boulder. Is a medieval boat called a Nor, K-N-O-R, an arrow, and the number is 184. And experts in Great Britain have indicated this is a type of thing that would have been used to mark a winter encampment site. And so that may have been what Sinclair and his group used to mark their overwintering spot in Westford, a little further up the Stony Brook River from where they disembarked to climb Prospect Hill.
Temporary wooden box which we used to put over it in the winter, because it's a hairpin bend, and being so close to the road, because Westford is so high, it gets so much snow in the winter, and when the plows come along, they dumped the ice and the salt on it, which was even adding to the erosion as well as acid rain. There's a clan historian in Britain, Niven Sinclair, has donated, and he actually is responsible for providing the funds for David Christiana to do that beautiful memorial that was only done last year, so your timing is perfect, because we've not had anything to show for it before.
Westford Remembers Memorial Fund. Essentially, I was working on the 9/11 monument, and they were having some issues with a project that an Eagle Scout was trying to do for the site for the Westford Night, and I kind of got involved and asked to get involved. So I initially made it in my garage at home, and I made it out of clay originally. After I was finally done with it, it weighed about 500 pounds, and it had to go to a foundry, and they make a copy of it with silicone, and they make a wax copy, and then they eventually make it into bronze, and that's what it is now. I mean, I primarily had to do my own research on how to do it, what a knight from the 14th century would have looked like from that area he was supposed to be from. And then of course I looked at the drawings of the carvings, and I really didn't have much to go on, so I had to do a lot of research to figure out what kind of armor and stuff he would have had.
If they knew enough to come to the library first, we've got all this information, and we tell them either walk down or go beyond. As I say, most people come in the summer because they're going further north, or they're coming to New England on vacation. And so we tell them to go down park at the Abbott School and walk back. It's not far. But it's a difficult place to get to.
Partly that. There's partly a real stubbornness, I think, among academic experts who have oftentimes staked their reputation on the fact that nobody was here in North America before Columbus, other than perhaps the Vikings. They always have the little, asterisk. Well, they don't count because they were only in northern Canada. They didn't come further down. I think they did come further down, by the way. But there's always this hesitation once people have taken a position academically and professionally and staked their reputation on something. It's hard to get them to change their minds.
I think it's so just unimaginable, because, and the archaeologists are taught that no, I've had one tell me to my face, no European before Columbus. And they were taught that, and of course they lose face if they, but a lot of them, well, some of them, especially in New England, are coming around. They really are beginning to see, the more work that's done on it, they're beginning to believe that it really did happen.
And I think it's just a question of, we all grew up in second grade, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and it's almost like when you're told that that's not the real history, it's almost like being told Santa Claus isn't real, or the Easter Bunny isn't real, and we all get past it, but there's a real marriage we all have emotionally to those legends of our youth.
Part of your history, very important part. And it's only asking to go back, 100 years before Columbus. Once you make the start, you can go back so far. I mean, all those peoples that came.
And so usually it takes about a generation. I think that's what's going on here now. I think that I've been working on this legend for about 10 years, and I've seen a real change even in this decade. People starting to come to the realization that it makes sense. I mean, to me, it's always been more surprising that somebody didn't come between the Vikings and Columbus. You have a 500-year gap. Why wouldn't people have continued coming back and forth? There were good things to do here. There was timber to make ships. There was fish. There were things to trade with the natives. It was a good economic opportunity, and the Vikings understood that. And then later, many other nations came over after Columbus. Well, why wouldn't the descendants of the Vikings continue to come back and take advantage of those opportunities? Again, to me, it would have been more surprising if people didn't come back than that they did.